The spoon trembled slightly as Unteroffizier Karl Hoffmann lifted it to his mouth, tasting fresh milk for the first time in 2 years. Real milk, not the powdered substitute that had become standard in the Afrika Korps since 1941. The sweet cream coating his tongue contradicted everything the Wehrmacht had told him about American resources. In his hidden journal, concealed beneath his mattress, he would write words that would have earned him punishment from the Nazi officers in his own barracks. The Americans feed their prisoners better than Germany feeds its own soldiers. June 4th, 1943. Mexia, Texas. Through the mess hall windows at the newly opened camp 4 miles west of town, he could see American guards casually eating sandwiches thick with meat. In the Afrika Korps, his unit had survived on 300 grams of canned meat and 125 grams of hard bread as their daily iron ration, supplemented when lucky with captured British supplies. Yet here, in what Nazi propaganda had described as a nation weakened by Jewish influence and democratic softness, food appeared without limit. 1,850 veterans of Field Marshal Erwin Rommel's legendary Afrika Korps filed into the mess hall that morning. Not a field kitchen with its 2-horse Gulaschkanone wagon serving watery soup, not the sand-contaminated rations of North Africa, but a fully equipped dining facility with electric refrigerators, steam tables, and industrial dishwashers. Each 5 barracks had a mess hall with cooks, waiters, silverware, and by all accounts very good food. The entire town of Mexia had turned out to watch their arrival, staring at the tanned, healthy enemy soldiers marching down Railroad Street. What none of them knew was that this breakfast would trigger the most profound psychological shock in modern prisoner-of-war history, the systematic demolition of Nazi racial theory through the simple act of eating. The mathematics of American agricultural production were being served not in propaganda leaflets, but on metal trays loaded with eggs, bacon, white bread, butter, jam, and real coffee. Their worldview would crumble not through military defeat alone, but through daily confrontation with impossible plenty. The journey to this moment had begun on May 13, 1943, in Tunisia. General Jürgen von Arnim, Rommel's replacement after the Desert Fox had been recalled to Germany, surrendered along with approximately 275,000 German and Italian soldiers. The Afrika Korps, which had driven the British back to the gates of Cairo, which had earned the grudging respect of Montgomery himself, was suddenly captive. Among them was Obergefreiter Franz Müller, holder of the Iron Cross Second Class, veteran of the Poland and France campaigns, survivor of 2 years in the North African desert. His account, discovered decades later in the National Archives, would provide historians with the most detailed description of German soldiers' food shock in American captivity. We had been living on 750 grams of bread, 150 grams of fat, and 120 grams of sausage or tinned fish daily when supplies reached us, he wrote. More often we survived on dates, captured rations, or nothing at all. The journey from defeat to revelation began in the collection cages at Tunis. As Müller and 30,000 other prisoners waited in makeshift camps for transport ships, American logistics were already beginning to shatter their preconceptions. The U.S. Army processed thousands of prisoners daily with an organizational precision that exceeded anything the Wehrmacht had achieved even at the height of its power. But it was the food that delivered the first psychological blow. Feldwebel Hans Klein, captured with the 15th Panzer Division, wrote to his wife 6 months later from Camp McCain in Mississippi. In the cages at Tunis, while we waited for ships, the Americans gave us white bread with our meals. White bread. In Africa, we had been eating Neckerbrot, a hard, crisp, whole wheat cracker when we were fortunate. The American guards consumed more bread at each meal than my squad had seen in a week. The Liberty ships that would carry them across the Atlantic were themselves monuments to American logistics. These vessels, produced at a rate of 3 per day at peak production, were returning from delivering supplies to the European theatre. The prisoners were usually shipped in Liberty ships returning home that would otherwise be empty, with as many as 30,000 arriving per month. Rather than the cattle cars they expected, they found themselves in ships' holds that had been modified for human transport, with ventilation, lighting and proper sanitary facilities. The 2-week Atlantic crossing in July 1943 provided the second phase of culinary shock. Gefreiter Wilhelm Becker of the 21st Panzer Division kept a food diary that survived in letters to his family after repatriation. Breakfast: oatmeal with sugar and milk, white bread with butter, coffee with cream, he wrote on July 15th. This was food for officers in Germany, not common soldiers. Yet here, even we prisoners received it. The meals served aboard ships amazed the Germans. They discovered that American merchant sailors ate steak, eggs, fresh vegetables and ice cream. Ice cream! In Germany, this was a luxury reserved for the highest party officials. The ship's refuse contained more calories than entire German units received in their daily rations. Lieutenant Heinrich Weber, whose Prussian military family had served Germany since the time of Frederick the Great, later wrote in his unpublished memoirs, "As our ship approached the American coast, I watched sailors disposing of barely touched meals, complete dinners going overboard. I thought of my men in Africa, grateful for a handful of dates and brackish water, and I began to understand that we had been fighting not just an enemy, but an entire civilization beyond our comprehension." August 2nd, 1943, Norfolk Naval Base, Virginia. The first meal on American soil shattered the last remnants of Nazi propaganda about American weakness. Upon arriving in America, the comfort of the Pullman cars that carried them to their prison camps amazed the Germans, as did the country's large size and undamaged prosperity. But nothing prepared them for the bounty awaiting them. At the processing station, they were served a meal that defied belief: fried chicken, mashed potatoes with gravy, green beans, cornbread, apple pie, and coffee with real sugar. Unteroffizier Johann Fischer, a baker's son from Munich, calculated in his diary that this single meal contained more meat than his family's monthly ration in Germany. The Americans apologized that the meal was simple because we had arrived unexpectedly, Fischer wrote. Apologized. For food that German generals would have considered a feast. That moment revealed the depth of our delusion. The train journey from Norfolk to the camps of Texas and Oklahoma would prove more destructive to Nazi ideology than any military defeat. As the trains rolled through Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Arkansas, the prisoners pressed their faces against windows, witnessing an America that couldn't exist according to Nazi doctrine. At every stop, they observed American railroad workers consuming meat sandwiches, drinking bottles of Coca-Cola, smoking cigarettes without concern for rationing. At a stop in Memphis, Tennessee, prisoners watched as a dining car was loaded with fresh provisions: sides of beef, crates of eggs, sacks of potatoes, boxes of fresh vegetables. The quantity loaded for one train exceeded what entire German divisions had received in a month in Africa. Stabsgefreiter Rudolf Richter, an agricultural inspector from Westphalia before his conscription, documented what he saw. The amount of food transported daily on American railways could sustain all of Germany. I saw freight cars full of wheat, refrigerated cars carrying meat and milk, entire trains devoted to moving food from farms to cities. No military guards, no special protection. Food moved with the constancy of flowing rivers. September 19th, 1943. Camp Hearn, Texas. The arrival at the permanent camps provided the next level of cognitive demolition through food. The United States tried to make life as good as possible for the POWs for two reasons: to ensure good treatment for American POWs and to win the hearts of the German prisoners who would return to rebuild a post-war Europe. The mess halls exceeded anything most German soldiers had experienced even before the war. Electric refrigerators hummed constantly, automated dishwashers cleaned thousands of plates, steam tables kept food warm for hours, industrial mixers kneaded dough for fresh bread daily. POWs were guaranteed by the Geneva Convention to get food, clothing, and medical care equal to that of their captors. At Camp Swift, Texas, Unteroffizier Karl Hoffmann was assigned to kitchen duty. What he discovered there would haunt him for decades. "Today we disposed of 300 pounds of food," he wrote on September 23rd. Not spoiled food, but excess from overcooking. The American regulations require preparing 10% more than needed to ensure every prisoner receives full portions. The surplus is removed. The daily ration scale posted in the kitchen read like fantasy. 3/4 of a pound of meat per day, 1 pound of potatoes, 1/2 pound of vegetables, 3/4 of a pound of bread, plus sugar, coffee, milk, butter, and eggs. The cost to feed prisoners was carefully managed by the government, with farmers who employed POWs paying 45 cents per hour per labourer to help offset the millions needed for the POW program. Feldwebel Hans Klein, now at Camp McCain in Mississippi, wrote, "For breakfast we receive oatmeal or cornflakes with milk and sugar, scrambled eggs, bacon, toast with butter and jam, coffee with cream. For lunch, meat, always meat, with vegetables, potatoes or rice, bread and a dessert. For dinner, more meat, more vegetables, soup, bread and coffee. On Sundays we get chicken or turkey with all the traditional accompaniments." The prisoners discovered that American military rations far exceeded what German civilians had received even before the war. German civilian rations had dropped to 2,078 calories in 1942 and 43, then to 1,981 calories in 43 and 44. Meanwhile, German POWs in American camps were receiving over 3,000 calories daily. At Camp Clinton, Mississippi, which housed the highest-ranking German officers, including 25 generals, the food situation was even more remarkable. General von Arnim, Rommel's replacement, lived in a house and was furnished a car and driver. The generals had their own cooks and could request special meals. They dined on steaks, roasted chickens, fresh fish and vegetables that hadn't been available to German civilians since 1940. But even the enlisted men's rations stunned the prisoners. Obergefreiter Franz Müller wrote from Camp Shelby, "Today for lunch we had fried catfish, caught fresh from Mississippi rivers. With it, coleslaw, hush puppies, a fried cornbread, green beans and peach cobbler for dessert. The Negro soldiers who serve us eat the same food. In Germany, we were told Americans starved their Negro population. Another propaganda fabrication exposed." October 1943. By autumn, German POWs were working on American farms, and what they witnessed there completed the destruction of Nazi agricultural mythology. From 1943, when the POWs arrived in large numbers, until the end of the war in 1945, the POWs in Texas picked peaches and citrus fruits, harvested rice, cut wood, baled hay, threshed grain, and gathered pecans. At a dairy farm outside Huntsville, Texas, Unteroffizier Ernst Wagner watched in disbelief as the farmer dumped hundreds of gallons of milk because the processing plant couldn't handle the surplus. "He poured it on the ground without concern," Wagner wrote. "Milk that German mothers would have begged for their children, used to irrigate pastures. When I protested, the farmer explained there was simply excess production. The price would collapse if everything reached market." About 12,000 prisoners of war were held in camps in Nebraska. They worked across the road from farms, stacking hay and working in the sugar beet fields. There, Gefreiter Paul Schmidt worked on a corn farm and wrote, "The farmers' chickens eat grain without restriction. The farm cats receive fresh milk daily. The dogs get meat scraps that would sustain a German family for days." The American farmers who employed POW labour often invited them to share meals. This violated no regulations as long as guards were present. These meals in American farm kitchens delivered perhaps the most devastating psychological impact. Farmers who contracted for POW workers usually provided meals for them, and these spreads were overwhelming. Platters of fried chicken, bowls of mashed potatoes swimming in butter, green beans cooked with ham, corn on the cob dripping with butter, biscuits with gravy, multiple varieties of pie, pitchers of cold milk, and endless coffee. Christmas 1943. The holiday meal delivered a psychological impact from which many prisoners never recovered. At Camp Hearn, Texas, the Christmas dinner menu read like an impossible dream. Roast turkey with stuffing, honey-glazed ham, mashed potatoes with giblet gravy, candied sweet potatoes, green beans, corn, cranberry sauce, fresh-baked rolls with butter, mince pie, pumpkin pie, apple pie with ice cream, coffee, milk, and apple cider. Feldwebel Hans Klein wrote from Camp McCain, "We ate until we were physically ill. Not from bad food, but from overwhelming quantity. Our stomachs, conditioned by years of inadequate rations, could not process such amounts. Men were weeping while eating, remembering hungry families at home." The contrast with German rations was stark. German POWs in German camps received 9 pounds of potatoes per week, augmented by 5 pounds of bread and 2.5 pounds of cabbage, with small amounts of margarine and ersatz coffee made from acorns. Meanwhile, German POWs in America were experiencing nutrition levels unknown since peacetime. March 1944. As spring arrived, the food situation in the camps became even more remarkable. Fresh vegetables appeared daily: lettuce, tomatoes, cucumbers, radishes, carrots, celery. Fruits that had been unimaginable luxuries in Germany: oranges, grapefruit, bananas, strawberries in season. The variety alone overwhelmed men accustomed to monotonous military fare. The camp bakeries produced fresh bread daily: white bread, whole wheat, rye, whatever the bakers chose. Prisoners who worked in the bakeries reported using more flour in a single day than German bakeries received in a month. Unteroffizier Johann Fischer, the baker's son, was assigned to the Camp Swift bakery. He wrote, "We bake 500 loaves daily for our compound alone. We make pastries, cakes, cookies for special occasions. The sugar we use for one day's desserts would have supplied a German bakery for months." Summer 1944. The invasion of Normandy on June 6th brought news that Germany was now fighting on 3 fronts, yet the food situation in American POW camps remained unchanged. If anything, it improved as more prisoners were assigned to agricultural work and witnessed firsthand the source of American prosperity. In Nebraska, prisoners working in the sugar beet fields discovered that American farmers produced more sugar beets in one county than several German provinces combined. At a canning factory in Arkansas, prisoners observed tons of perfectly edible peaches being rejected for minor cosmetic blemishes. Meanwhile, at Fort Lewis in Washington state, a different group of German POWs was experiencing similar revelations. Among them would be 18-year-old Günther Graver, who arrived in August 1944 after being captured in Normandy. Standing in front of the camp canteen in August or September 1944, considering what to buy first, an ice cream or a bottle of Coca-Cola, he would later write, "The last ice cream I had been able to buy in Germany was years ago, but Coca-Cola, never before, so I decided to take both. I suddenly realized how extremely lucky I had been to be captured by the American army and not the Russian one." September 1944. After more than a year in captivity, many German POWs had gained 20 to 30 pounds. Medical examinations showed improved health across all metrics: better teeth from regular milk consumption, stronger bones from adequate protein, clearer skin from vitamins in fresh vegetables and fruits. Dr. Friedrich Bauer, a German medical officer imprisoned at Camp Shelby, Mississippi, documented the health transformation. The men who arrived as prisoners were malnourished, many suffering from scurvy, pellagra, and other deficiency diseases. After 1 year of American rations, they are healthier than they have ever been. Their physical transformation is remarkable. The psychological impact went even deeper. Gefreiter Wilhelm Becker wrote, "We no longer speak of German victory. How can we defeat a nation that feeds prisoners abundantly while waging war on multiple fronts? This level of resources reveals an insurmountable advantage. December 1944. The Battle of the Bulge represented Germany's last major offensive, yet in American POW camps, Christmas dinner 1944 exceeded even the previous year's feast. Turkey, ham, roast beef, all the traditional accompaniments, plus special treats. Fruitcake shipped from American bakeries, candy canes, chocolate, real chocolate, not the ersatz variety made from turnips that had become standard in Germany, nuts and fresh fruit. At Camp Clinton, Mississippi, Italian POWs who had changed sides after Italy's surrender were allowed to help prepare special pasta dishes for Christmas. The German POWs watched as their former allies, now cooperating with Americans, prepared food with ingredients, olive oil, real cheese, white flour, that had vanished from German tables years earlier. May 8, 1945. Victory in Europe Day. The war was over, but the food revelations continued. German POWs learned that throughout the entire war, American civilians had never faced serious food rationing. Meat had been limited, sugar and coffee restricted, but Americans never experienced true hunger. The strategic depth of American agriculture had never been touched by war. In May 1945, the Office of the Provost Marshal General limited available food and ended canteen food sales. Civilians had complained that the prisoners were eating too well. Even with reduced rations, German POWs continued to receive more food than German civilians would see for years after the war. The statistics, when finally compiled, revealed an undeniable truth. German POWs in America consumed an average of 3,200 calories per day. German soldiers in combat received theoretically 3,600 calories when supplies reached them, which was increasingly rare. German civilians by 1945 received fewer than 1,412 calories daily. American camps served approximately 3/4 of a pound of meat per prisoner daily. German weekly military ration included 120 grams of sausage or tinned fish when available. The contrast between American plenty and German scarcity had become the most powerful argument against Nazi ideology, not through words, but through daily experience. Summer 1945. As German prisoners of war prepared for repatriation, many begged to remain in America. They had witnessed an agricultural system that transformed their understanding of what was possible. Hans Wecker, a POW at Fort Robinson, Nebraska, later recalled, "Life in the camps was a vast improvement for many of us who had grown up in cold water flats in Germany. We discovered running water, central heating, and abundant food. Our treatment was excellent." The re-education program achieved its greatest success through meals rather than lectures. Each day, German prisoners confronted evidence that contradicted Nazi teachings about American weakness. Every satisfied appetite challenged their former beliefs about racial superiority and democratic inefficiency. Dr. Walter Schreiber, a former Wehrmacht colonel and agricultural economist, calculated after the war, the food America provided to German prisoners could have sustained the entire German Sixth Army at Stalingrad. Their agricultural surplus would have fed all of occupied Europe. We never understood we were fighting a nation that had solved the fundamental problem of human existence, how to feed everyone. Between 1945 and 1946, 371,683 German POWs were repatriated from American camps. They returned to a Germany destroyed, divided, and starving. But they brought invaluable knowledge, that prosperity was achievable, that a society could nourish all its citizens, that democratic systems could produce abundance rather than chaos. Many former POWs became leaders in West Germany's agricultural revolution. Hans Müller, imprisoned at Camp Shelby, introduced American farming methods to Bavaria, increasing crop yields by 40% within 5 years. Wilhelm Fischer from Camp McCain helped establish food distribution networks based on American models. Friedrich Bauer advocated for nutritional standards he had observed in American prison camps. After repatriation, about 5,000 Germans emigrated to the United States, and thousands more would have come if permitted. They sought not just economic opportunity, but the food security they had discovered as prisoners. October 1947. Fort Lewis, Washington. Among the last German POWs to be repatriated was Günter Grawe, who had spent 3 years as a prisoner. Decades later, he would return to America as a successful businessman, but he never forgot that moment at the camp canteen when he could choose between ice cream and Coca-Cola, luxuries his family in Germany could only dream about. We always were treated with fairness, got sufficient food and 80 cents a day that gave us the chance to buy cigarettes, chocolate, ice cream and Coca-Cola, he would write 73 years later. Things my mother and sister in Germany could only dream of. 1985. Austin, Texas. At the 40th anniversary reunion of German POWs, over 500 former prisoners returned to America, many bringing their families to show them where their transformation had begun. Former Unteroffizier Karl Hoffmann, now 78 years old and an American citizen since 1955, delivered a speech that captured the essence of their experience. We came to America as warriors of the Third Reich, convinced of our racial superiority, certain that American democracy was weak. We departed as witnesses to a profound truth. America's strength came from agricultural productivity, not racial purity. Every meal in the prison camps challenged our beliefs. The Americans fed us, their enemies, better than Hitler fed us, his soldiers. They had such surplus that waste was routine. This wasn't mockery, but simple reality. We learned that a nation capable of feeding its enemies without strain has achieved true victory. A society with such resources has accomplished what the Third Reich never could, defeating scarcity itself. We returned to Germany knowing our entire worldview was built on deception. The Americans had prevailed through agricultural superiority and industrial capacity. We who had marched as conquerors had been transformed by witnessing abundance beyond imagination. To America, from your former enemies, thank you for demonstrating that strength comes from creation, not destruction. You fed us when we would have starved you. That generosity and victory defines genuine power. The auditorium erupted in sustained applause. Americans and Germans together, former enemies united in recognition of a transformation that had begun with a simple meal in June 1943. The story of German POWs and American food demonstrates how profound change can occur through experience rather than argument. The German soldiers who witnessed American agricultural capacity became living testimony to democracy's practical success. Their transformation began not with political lectures, but with daily meals, not with propaganda, but with experienced reality. Each meal challenged Nazi ideology more effectively than any formal education could have achieved. The transformation was so complete that when former POW Günter Grawe returned to Fort Lewis in 2017 at age 91, he rode a bicycle across the base with signs reading, "USA, the country and its people, you are my first and final love." It was in August 1944 when I came here for the first time as a prisoner of war. We always were treated with fairness, got sufficient food and 80 cents a day that gave us the chance to buy cigarettes, chocolate, ice cream and Coca-Cola, things my mother and sister in Germany could only dream of. That's why I have come here 73 years later to say, thank you, America. I will never forget it. Colonel William Percival, Joint Base Lewis McCord, Deputy Garrison Commander, greeted him with these words. You remind us that how you treat somebody defines who we are. There are times, even today, when we may want to forget that, and you let us know that's a lesson not to be forgotten. The German POWs experienced American agricultural capacity and were profoundly changed by it. They arrived as enemies, departed as witnesses, and many returned as immigrants and friends. Their children would mature in a democratic Germany allied with the United States, a partnership built on understanding gained through unexpected generosity. The camps themselves left minimal physical traces. Most were dismantled after the war, their buildings sold or demolished, their land returned to farms or converted to other uses. But their impact endured in the memories of those who experienced them and in the democratic reconstruction of Germany that followed. The Marshall Plan, which would feed and rebuild Europe, extended the lesson learned in POW camps, that generosity in victory creates lasting peace. Former POWs who succeeded in post-war Germany often credited their American camp experience as transformative. They had witnessed prosperity achieved through cooperation rather than conquest, different races working together productively, democratic systems producing wealth rather than chaos. These lessons, absorbed through daily experience, proved more powerful than any theoretical education. Dr. Arnold Kramer, the leading historian of German POWs in America, concluded, "America won the propaganda war not through clever messages, but through sheer reality. Every meal, every electric light, every working toilet was an argument against Nazism. The POWs were converted by prosperity they could see, touch, and taste." The numbers tell only part of the story. Yes, 371,683 German POWs were held in America. Yes, they worked 14 million man-days of agricultural labor. Yes, fewer than 1% attempted escape. But the real story lies in human transformation through the simple act of eating well while being treated with dignity. When modern historians examine post-war German democracy's success, they often point to the Marshall Plan, denazification programs, or the Soviet threat. But they sometimes overlook the 370,000 German soldiers who returned home having experienced American democracy as daily sustenance, fair treatment despite being enemies, resources shared rather than hoarded. These men became democracy ambassadors, each one influencing family, friends, and communities with their experience. They had lived within the supposed enemy's system and found it superior in every measurable way. This undeniable reality discredited Nazi ideology more effectively than any propaganda campaign. When the last German POW departed American shores in 1946, they left behind a remarkable record. The lowest escape rate of any major POW population in history, the highest rate of voluntary cooperation with camp authorities, and the most successful transformation of enemy combatants into future allies. All achieved not through harsh treatment or intensive propaganda, but through simple humanity and abundant food. The investment America made in feeding its prisoners, through agricultural resources and logistical effort, yielded immeasurable returns. Hundreds of thousands of Germans who had experienced democracy firsthand, who understood that American strength came from productive capacity rather than racial ideology, who recognized Nazi propaganda as complete fabrication. In the end, the German POW's experience in America proved that true power lies in the ability to create and share abundance. The fact that America could feed its enemies better than Germany could feed its own soldiers revealed fundamental truths about competing systems that no amount of propaganda could overcome. The German POWs arrived in America expecting weakness and division. Instead, they discovered agricultural and industrial capacity of unlimited scope combined with surprising humanity. They came as prisoners but departed as witnesses to democratic achievement. In their transformation lay the seeds of the Atlantic Alliance, the Marshall Plan, and a rebuilt democratic Germany. They had experienced American plenty and would never forget. Their grandchildren would grow up in prosperous democratic Germany, allied with the United States, members of NATO, citizens of the European Union. All traceable, in part, to that moment when hungry Afrika Korps soldiers consumed their first American meal and recognized their entire worldview was based on lies. Food had influenced the war's outcome as decisively as any weapon. Meals had won hearts as completely as any battle, and in that victory lay the foundation for lasting peace, built not on threats, but on the promise of shared prosperity. The German POWs were surprised by American prison food better than Wehrmacht rations, and through that surprise came transformation. In their transformation lay hope for a world where former enemies could become friends, where democracy could triumph not through force, but through the revolutionary act of feeding everyone, even those who had come as destroyers.